the flowers fell, all the letters are gone. I found a hope I can lean upon. You broke the spell, time is moving on. Love never fails, I'm never alone. Every promise I made, every tear that I cried, there's a purpose that stays, there's a reason behind. I gave you everything, didn't know where would begin. You pulled away, I fell apart, but God wins. He heals the cracks, lifts me up from deep within. You walked away, I held, but God wins. He wins, he wins. He wins, even in the silence, when the memories fade, faith gives me courage to face a new day. From the ashes rising, I can breathe again. Love is stronger, it's not the end. He wins, he wins. He wins, he wins.
Good morning, my friends. Good morning, Dylan. Thank you very much. I appreciate you popping in. I want to say hello to everybody. I apologize. The last few weeks, my life has been lifing. It's been mad. It's been so mad. I had to take a step away for a couple of weeks and deal with some sort of personal stuff, and everyone's needing my attention. So unfortunately, I missed the kickoff of World War III. But I want to wish you all a good day, and hopefully transmission as normal. I'm going to get kicking back into it this week. It seems I missed the start of World War III. What the fuck is going on here? I was just doing some digging last night and some diligence. I'm like, what have I missed? How can I miss this? So anyway, I hope you're all right, mate. Yeah, everything's all right my end, Dylan. I hope everything's all right your end. Hopefully the weather's a bit nicer. Obviously, we've got sunny Spain here. The seasons have changed. We've got some nice sunshine. As you can see, we've got the arms out, a bit of sun on the skin. Just got back in from walking the dog. But I wanted just to apologise. Been a bit tardy the last few weeks. I know a lot of you have obviously been following what's been going on, and again, I obviously this is my field, this is my thing. But I thought I've got to get a show out today. So I hope you like the thumbnail. I hope you like the intro song. I like that one. God wins. I know not everyone's religious, but there's something good about that kind of energy right now, with especially what's going on a geopolitical front. So anyway, I hope you've been doing well, and I hope everyone's having a nice run up to Easter. Quite a religious time for a lot of people. Obviously, a very ritualistic time historically as well. So, we could be in for some fireworks. So one of the reasons I wanted to get this video out ahead of time is because I kind of anticipate something probably not so good happening over the next few weeks. So let's see if I'm right or wrong. But I wanted to bring a little show and have a little catch up with what's been going on. Yeah, the last few weeks have been crazy, Jem. Crazy. I was running through it today, and before every show, as you all know, I've got a whiteboard. So I write down some sort of bullet points just to sort of lead me through my sort of spiel, if you like. And I've got pages of it. I'm like, Jesus Christ, dear, there's so much stuff been going on. But, where do we start? Obviously, America, Israel, and Iran has been all kicking off, hasn't it? I don't know what happened there. Who started that? Well, I know who started it. From what I can be seeing and what I'm following, it looks like there was some attacks that happened on, Iran for, dubious reasons. I don't like this stuff. I condemn this stuff. I don't like anything involved with attacking people and civilians being killed and stuff. I think it's really sad, in any way, shape or form, no matter who you are, where you are in the world, what your beliefs are, what the colour of your skin is, I'm impartial to everybody, but I just don't like seeing this stuff. It really touches a nerve of me when there's kids involved as well. Obviously, one of the things I was reading was, one of the original attacks that happened in Iran a few weeks ago, 150 innocent school children were bombed inside their school. For me, that really hits home. I've got a young son, and I just envision something like that happening to me. So, yeah, it really does sort of hit a chord with me. But yeah, I'm Catholic. I'm Christian, Catholic, it's all kind of the same thing, isn't it, really? But, I'm very religious based. So, it does sort of really itch me when I see what's been going on. But yeah, so it started off with some bombing that happened a few weeks ago. It looks like the instigation of the wars happened from America and obviously Israel on this channel. You know, no holds barred. You know, I know a lot of people are sensitive about certain countries being mentioned and certain religions, but if you've watched any of my content before, you know, I don't hold back on that stuff. It's just what I think. And if it rubs you up the wrong way, then so be it. But it seems to be an instigation from Israel using, you know, the American sort of armed forces as a kind of, you know, a lead into whatever their sort of long-term goals are. You know, we all know what's been happening over the Middle East over the last few years. You know, only 20 years ago when I first got into conspiracies, we'll start with this. You know, there was 9 countries in the world that didn't have a Rothschild's bank. And we're down to the last few, and Iran being one of them. You know, Venezuela, Syria, Afghanistan, Iran, Cuba, Lebanon, Iraq. You know, all of these have in some way, shape or form had their leadership changed. You know, this is not right. I don't like this. I don't like that countries decide who is in charge of other countries. You know, if you're a sovereign country, you know, the people of that country need to decide, you know, who's running it, you know, because every country's got their own invested interests. They've got their own commodities, economies, you know, people that rely on, you know, people in charge of their countries bringing the best to the people. So I don't like seeing the overthrowing of governments. This is something that Americans seem to like doing. You know, if you look historically, you know, the Americans seem to do it quite a lot, don't they? So unfortunately, yeah, it looks like we're into the next stage of a Rothschild bank going into Iran. But yes, it's really, really bad. I saw Trump, you know, obviously started to put a deadline, you know, on was it a 5-day deadline to open the Strait of Hormuz? How can a world leader from the other part of the world start making demands like that? It just backfires in his face, and that 5-day deadline is up today, I think. So obviously there's no compliance, there's no negotiations. If you've caught any of the Iranian military that have been out on the news over the last few days, they're talking all sorts of stuff about how they're not going to negotiate, how the US and Israel have been breaking UN charter, how they need to be condemned and actually held accountable. You know, like at this particular point, it does look like the US and the Israeli have got invested interest in, you know, probably not only blowing up parts of Iran. Personally, I think that's got something to do with the Tartarian buildings that are in Tehran. You know, there's lots of historical buildings that have been destroyed in wars over the last 2, World War I, World War II, Dresden by the UK in particular. You know, they seem to like destroying all these old world buildings and infrastructures. You know, and Iran was one of the places in the world that still has quite a lot of it intact. You know, obviously they don't conform to the, you know, the banking cartel. So they were inevitably on the list, and the US have been trying to get to these guys for years. You know, if you followed any of these politicians in the US, you know, they scream Iran at any opportunity, you know, as long as I can remember. So this has been inevitable, you know, for a long, long time. Hi, Scott Spur. Yeah, morning. Chile, Scotland. I heard you had snow there yesterday. In England, south of England as well. I've got friends in Belfast, and they were telling me you had snow yesterday. Like I said, look, I've got my arms out, got some sun here. I'll try and send you some of my 25 degrees sunshine today. But anyway, I wanted just to sort of talk into this as well and give my 2 pence on it. We'll see what comes of it. But yeah, so the 5-day deadline, that's over. Negotiations apparently are continuing, as the Americans tend to sort of emphasize. But if you listen to what the Iranians are saying, they're saying no negotiations have happened, no prizes have changed hands, no deals have been made, and the conditions on deals from both sides are just completely incompatible. There's just no way that these particular parties can come to an arrangement, because they both want the opposite of what each other wants. So, you know, the inevitable will kick off here, I think. But the White House, no, I haven't seen the tweets from last night. Like I said a minute ago, I've been flying through, you know, catching up over the last 24 hours and stuff. But there's something really wrong, isn't there? There's something really, really wrong. You know, the White House putting out tweets and stuff like this. I'll get into them later on. If you want to enlighten me a little bit, Jem, then, you know, maybe we can sort of talk about it. But it seems to be like, you know, lots of misinformation out there. I don't know if you've caught a lot of this. There's lots of misinformation out there. You know, the Iranian military have been destroyed. If you listen to the US and Israel, and if you listen to the Iranians, they're saying the US has been destroyed and they're running, and there's lots of people they've killed them. You know, first things first, Iran has the right to defend themselves. You know, I'm going to put it right out there off the bat. You know, if that's the narrative we run with to destroy Gaza, then let's stick to that narrative first of all. I'm not going to get involved with who's right, who's wrong, if that's the play, and that applies to everybody. So if the US and the Israelis have been, instigating a war with them, they have a right to defend themselves as far as I'm concerned. I have no dog in the fight at all. I'll make it very, very clear. But, you can't just start bombing sovereign countries. You can't do it. Trump was doing it with Venezuela. He just went in, just decided to kidnap a leader, stick him in jail, and try and overthrow a government. That's not democracy. If you want to, be the guy that, or the country that is trying to lead, the flag for democracy, you've got to act democratic. You've got to be democracy. You've got to be the shining light of democracy. So how can you do things completely undemocratic by taking out leaders from countries that you're not involved with? This should be condemned on every single level. I hate it. I hate seeing it. I just don't know why the world goes with it. I know a lot of the press, a lot of the news, a lot of the financial world, is controlled by the West. The US and Israel. There are a lot of these media publications. So you're going to get a conflict of information, and it's very hard to pick up the other side of it. Being in the West, we don't get too much information out of Iran. We don't get too much information out of the Middle East that's translated to English speakers like ourselves. So it's very hard to know where it is. As I said, there's lots of misinformation that I've come across already over the last few days. They talk about the regime change. The Ayatollah's been killed over there a few weeks ago. They decided to bomb and murder, another leader of another country. But when you listen to what the Iranians are saying, they're saying that's not the case. He hasn't been killed. They've been hiding. So the regime is still intact. From what the news was saying, the son of the Ayatollah is now in charge there. But is he? Do we know that for a fact? Or, are we just leading our information based on what the West is saying? Oh, I don't know. No, I've not seen that, Jem. Sorry, I was looking at that. I did see the Iranians yesterday put out some sort of type of moody AI video of them bombing New York. I saw that yesterday. That was on Russia Today. I've seen lots of stuff like that. But no, I'll get into that. I'll have a look at that later on once we finished all this stuff up. But no, I'm a little bit out of touch. Like I said, I've been away for a couple of weeks and stuff. So I think the last video I brought you, I think I was outside the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. And then a couple of days later, loads of stuff kicked off over here. And yeah, I've had to kind of shelve a few things. But I'm working on the Tartarian videos and stuff like that. I'm still having a bit of a problem sharing stuff on the StreamYard. I've paid the subscription and stuff, but on the phone it doesn't seem to give me the additional options to add in media to the stream. So I'm trying to figure that all out. I'm not so tech savvy, so could do with a little bit of assistance from somebody more in the know. So I'll reach out to Shawnee over in the rabbit hole over there. Hope he's doing well. I haven't seen any rabbit holes over the last few weeks or whatever, but hopefully we can get those going in the near future. I know he's having a torrid time with Tottenham, so I can understand. Luckily, I live in Barcelona, so I've got a 2-year loan. I'm not involved with that. I think I've watched one Tottenham game since November. So it's entertainment at the end of the day, isn't it? You're paying with your attention to be entertained, and if you're not being entertained, you have no obligation whatsoever to stay connected. So I'd imagine a lot of Spurs fans probably feel the same as me about that. But anyway, that's not the topic of today's show. That's completely off the cuff. But I do need to find a little bit of assistance in regards to getting the videos and the media so I can show some of this stuff. But anyway, bear with me. We'll get there. So anyway, yeah, so the Iranian leaders are mocking Trump. I saw yesterday they've come out and, they even said, "You're fired." I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was a brilliant troll. I love a little bit of trolling. The Iranian regime are coming out and telling Trump he's fired. That's just going to rub him up the wrong way. But is this all political play? One of the first things that always comes to my mind is, are they all in on this together? And this is some sort of type of theatre that we're all watching, systematically play out? Or is this actually what it's made to be? I don't know. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts and opinions, all of you. But yeah, so there's lots of stuff been going over there. Lots of mad stuff been going on there. I think today I see they're bombing, the Israelis are bombing Lebanon, Beirut. Obviously they continue their sieges in Syria and all these other places, Gaza. Operation Midnight Hammer is continuing. This is mad. Like, the whole world should condemn it. I know I live here in Spain. The Prime Minister here, Sanchez, he's come out in the last few weeks, completely condemned it from the beginning. Also, they've recognised Palestine as obviously a state. They've don't like what's been going on there. So I'm sure we're going to experience some sort of type of liberation here on the back of his stance, should we say? But yeah, I think a lot of the world leaders need to come together now. I think we need to see a lot of the world leaders come together and condemn this and stop this. You know, I was always against the red superpowers of the East. You know, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians. You know, all of these people. You know, they need to come together. Those three need to come together, and they need to stand behind, you know, the Iranians. That's what I think. You know, if you've got three nuclear superpowers, if nukes exist, you know, I'm not a big believer in nukes. I believe in missiles and stuff like that, as you probably all know or don't know. But I think we need to see, you know, an escalation, you know, of backing for the people that are being victimized here. You know, there's not really too much that's been affected in Israel or America, although I have seen over the last few days, there's been quite a lot of videos out there of the one I saw yesterday was USS Abraham Lincoln was bombed yesterday, 100 missiles hit it. But in this day and age, that could just be AI until it's confirmed by the Associated Press and, you know, the video circulates in a broader way. You got to take it with a pinch of salt. The same thing yesterday, there was a video of an F-18 being downed, a US pilot ejecting. And again, AI. This is the problem of the world we live in right now, is what information do we believe? So yeah, there's lots of that stuff going on. I see they was attacking allegedly Diego Garcia, which is the military base, the co-military base between the US and the UK. That's mad. Like, all of that stuff's mad. Like, but they are notorious for their false flags. If you're a conspiracy-minded people, this wouldn't be the first time that false flag has instigated a war. You know, we've seen it many, many times. I won't get into the history because there's too many allegedlys that will have to go in there. I haven't got the heart to do it. But, you know, if any of you know your history, especially US history, false flagging is a good way for them to get the public support into this particular type of fighting. I don't like it. It's dirty. It feels bad, doesn't it? It feels bad in the soul. So yeah, we're seeing all that stuff, and today we're going to be seeing probably some sort of type of message from the US, from the West. You know, now that 5-day deadline is over, we're going to be seeing probably some sort of type of escalation with boots on the ground. I would think that's the natural process. What happens in this situation? It's happened in Syria, happened in Afghanistan. It's the same playbook. You know, it's old school playbooks. You know, you'd think they'd update it, wouldn't you, and be a bit more creative with it? But it seems to be tried and tested, so they just run with it. But yeah, I think we're probably going to see, you know, thousands of US troops, you know, paratroopers hit the ground there in the bases that surround it, and probably find there'll be some sort of type of escalation. Potentially, maybe some sort of short-term de-escalation would be my initial thoughts. Maybe a peace agreement is made in some way, shape, or form to give the perspective and the kind of image that the US has won. But, you know, I don't think that's the case. You know, like, this is a serious superpower. You know, I think they're bitten off more than they can chew. So I think there's some sort of type of carnage that will have to happen off the back of all of this stuff. But yeah, boots on the ground, I think that will be probably the next stage. So maybe we'll have a cool down over the Easter period. Maybe not. He said it's a good time for rituals to happen. You know, Easter's a very symbolic time for a lot of people, very important time for a lot of people. You know, people probably should expect something to maybe escalate over the next few weeks, but maybe they have a little bit of a time off because of the holidays. I don't know. Just found my 2 pence out. But yeah, lots of stuff going on. So we've seen all that stuff happen. Even the UK is against this stuff. I saw a video of Keir Starmer against it. You know, I was sure he'd be on board with it. I saw his name would be top of the list. You know, he actually come out yesterday in the House of Commons and he was saying that they're against all this stuff. You know, this guy's a bad liar and a shit salesman. So you might find he changes his tune if, you know, Diego Garcia gets hit and, you know, some sort of type of UK interested base gets hit in the Middle East, then you'll probably find that narrative will change quickly. But at this particular moment, Keir Starmer is completely against this stuff as well. So, you know, he's not come out quite as much as what the Prime Minister here in Spain has done, but they need to condemn this stuff. They need to try and de-escalate this quickly. You know, we're heading into some sort of type of energy catastrophe. I don't know if any of you have seen the narrative of the energy lockdowns. How many of you will be participating in energy lockdowns? I, for one, will not be participating in energy lockdowns. I didn't participate in the last lockdowns or any of the narrative before. I definitely won't be partaking in anything like that. But, you know, unfortunately, if this does continue, we're going to see an inevitable price rise in natural gas and oil. We've already seen the spikes over the last few weeks. You've probably seen the price of, you know, the commodities do some sort of mad rally as well around this sort of time. They're taking a bit of a chill out over the last sort of week or two from what I could see. had a quick look at my investments and see they're sort of doing this, but gold has been peaking, silver's been peaking since about December. So again, this is a natural part of charting, technical analysis, that when you go into all-time highs, it will come back, test the support, and then it will bounce back up. So this ties into my thesis that potentially we're going to see some sort of type of de-escalation and re-escalation maybe later on, April, May, something like that. So yeah, lots of stuff going on with the financial markets related to this stuff. The thing that annoys me is it seems to be there's some sort of type of insider benefiting off of this information. I don't know if a lot of you saw, but someone banked $1.3 billion off the back of the announcement that Trump made only last week. He made an announcement that they've agreed something with Iran, and then bang, the market's correct. Someone was ahead of that information. Polymarket is a good way of sort of gauging what people are thinking on maybe inside tracks. It seems to be where a lot of people are doing this betting. It's like organized crime, but it's mad to see that. But someone's banking a lot of money. Someone's making a lot of money, for running this information, which is sad. I wish I had the information. I would try and bank on it as well. All I can do is use my initiative and experience in these worlds to try and guess what's happened. But I don't particularly like betting on stuff like that, because it means catastrophes, and I don't like to profit off of, people dying and stuff like that. It feels dirty, doesn't it? So I try not to get involved with that stuff. Yeah, we need a rabbit hole. Yeah, get on to Sean. Next time you're in one of his Spurs chats, I did send him a message this morning. Thanks, JP. Yeah, I asked him. I said, do you want to pop on? But I know he's a busy guy. I know he's got stuff going on. So, whenever that comes, it comes. But again, unfortunately, because I think a lot of the platforms that he runs, I think there's an invested interest in certain countries involved in this, and it might upset his base a little bit. So I completely understand why potentially this isn't something he wants to cover. But me, not so much. So if you've seen me in my shows before or any of my appearances on the rabbit hole, you know where I stand on all this stuff. I'm just against it. I'm just against war. I'm against people ruining people's lives. I'm a god man. I just want everyone to be at peace. But unfortunately, yeah, we need a rabbit hole. So if you're in any of Sean's shows today or whatever, get on him. Rabbit hole. I can't do one tonight though. So even if he was available, I can't do one tonight. But maybe over the weekend. So yeah, we need to do it. But yeah, these are the sort of subjects that get your channels closed down, unfortunately. And I don't really give a toss. So they can close this down today, and I'll feel like I've done God's work by putting my 2 pence out there ahead of time. But yeah, unfortunately, some people have a lot more to lose. So yeah, I completely understand. But we'll see. We'll see if we can get something going on. But anyway, so what else is going on here? So is nuclear weapons involved? Obviously, the whole pretext for this war on Iran is that they were weeks away from a nuclear weapon. I heard of this before with Iraq. We heard of this before with Afghanistan. Like, what's the saying? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you, or something like that, isn't it? Like it's that same feeling that I get. I don't like it. I feel like I've been here before. This is a deja vu for me. So I hope a lot of you probably agree with it. I'd imagine a lot of you that probably are in this channel and will see this information, you probably are very much like-minded, which is probably why you've followed me. But I do appreciate all of you that come in and share your thoughts and comments and stuff. And if you do have an opinion or whatever on what I'm saying here, or have an opinion on what's happening here, I'd love to read it afterwards in the comments and try and sort of come back to you over the later on in the day or next few days. But yeah, mate, it's mad what's going on over there, isn't it? So let's see what comes of it over the next sort of week or two. But who's winning this? There's a few questions that I ask myself is, who's winning this? What's the incentive here? Who's winning? What's the outcome going to be here? Why are America, doing the bidding for the Israelis? We know the invested interest in Israel is to always get more land. They make out like they're the victims, but they're the nuclear superpower in the region. So there can't be too much sympathy from a country that's got nuclear weapons, right? They're nuclear weapons that are still unconfirmed to this day. They allegedly have massive stockpiles of nuclear weapons. So why would they need a superpower from the other side of the world to be fighting their battles for them? But I think their invested interest is to expand their land, as they've done through the last 50 years. We've seen 60 years, 70 years. Since they was established as an occupation state, they've been just taking land from Palestinians. The maps prove it. It's the fact. They've given a small piece of land, and gradually over the last 70 years, they've acquired more. And this is the same reason why, they've probably decimated Gaza. They just want to expand their land. So that's their invested interest. I get that, 100% get that. But why the Americans need to get involved with this? I know they want wars with Iran because, potentially it helps their, companies that, military industrial complex that are involved in building weapons. They need wars to, justify, keep building this, crazy technology. But, there doesn't seem to be a real just reason. A lot of people will say that they're paid off, and I think I agree with that. A large percentage of Congress, has been supported by AIPAC, as you know. AIPAC has not been designated as a foreign entity, so they can still just keep throwing money into these guys. So pretty much 90% of Congress are going to be on board wherever the money's coming from. So I think there's kind of like an agreement here that we pay you, you support us. This is what we want. We keep doing it. We mentioned before in one of the rabbit holes, Netanyahu brought out a book in the 1980s. His 40-year plans come to fruition where he wants, the expanding of Israel. So it just seems to be that they're paying for the support, even though the Americans send billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars of taxpayers' money to Israel every single year for defense. They still need more from them. So I would like to see the US back away. I don't know how a lot of you would think about it. Watch your Spurs King. Thank you for popping in. I said apologies. I've had been lifing for the last couple of weeks. So I haven't been able to do anything, but what's been going on? There's world wars kicking off here. This might be the last time. So hello, goodbye and all that. The channel might get shut down. We might find ourselves in World War III tomorrow. We don't know. So we'll get the content out there. But I hope you're all right, Spurs King. I haven't been in any of the chats. I've not been in any of the channels. I've been completely off the internet for the last 2-3 weeks and stuff like that. Yeah, the Greater Israel, exactly. If you're in the conspiracy circles, Greater Israel involves them getting more land. This is something as well that you might see expand outside of the Middle East, potentially maybe somewhere like Greece. What tends to happen historically when this kind of situation arises for Israel, they tend to get given more land. And there seems to be some sort of type of invested interest in Israel and Greece. I don't know how far you've got down that rabbit hole, but maybe we'll touch base on that a little bit later on when we've got some more information. But yeah, it's definitely an expansion of their land. It makes sense. Just domination. I get it, completely understand. But why does the Americans need to be involved in it, other than just reinforcing the hand? So I think we're seeing maybe potentially some sort of type of political theatre here. As I said, energy lockdowns, printing money. When wars kick off, people tend to be less invested in what the governments are doing in terms of printing fiat currency. Every country is up to its eyeballs in debt. I think the US is now 39, nearly $40 trillion in debt. That's grandchildren's money. That's so far down the line. To pay that kind of money off, we need a financial reset, 100%. I don't know how many of you know about finance, but this is just not sustainable. The amount of interest they're paying on that particular debt to the holders of the debt, which is probably the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, it's just unsustainable. And then to go and start throwing billions and billions and billions and eventually trillions into another war, it just escalates that debt, and more money has to be printed. So is this some sort of type of financial scam for the Treasury and Federal Reserve to keep printing their money? All that stuff. I don't know. There will be winners, though. There will be winners on the back of this. There will be some sort of type of financial success that will happen somewhere. It's just a case of pointing out where it is. I've not been a stranger in saying that I believe there's an infrastructure change in the financial world that's coming. I do feel like crypto will be a foundation of a digital economies across the world. Maybe they need the economies to go bust. Maybe they need to print each country into oblivion of debt to be able to justify some sort of type of financial crash that inevitably is the false flag into, some sort of type of digital system. Everything on blockchain. It's inevitable, unfortunately, whether you like it or not. Cash is king. I'm, old school like that, but there's no way around this. The way forward is they're going to be printing money and then eventually switching over the system. So maybe this is free money to them. Again, this is just spitballing. But unfortunately, there are financial gains that we made somewhere. Maybe it'll be in crypto. Who knows? I don't think it'll be in the stock market. And I definitely don't think it'll be in any of the bubbles that have appeared over the last few years in housing and, treasuries and bonds and stocks and stuff. All of that stuff's peaked. You know, if you've got half a brain about you, you know, you understand that things go up and eventually when they peak, they come back down hard. You know, I think that's kind of where we're at. So as I said, this all could be instigated for some sort of type of, you know, financial reset as opposed to some sort of type of, you know, real aggressive war, you know, but we'll find out. I guess we'll find out in the near future. So we're not too far away from all that. You know, what I want to know why Trump is doing what he's doing. I know a lot of people have come out recently over the last few days, big supporters of Trump, like Marjorie Green Taylor. You know, these people like this, you know, they were the people that were speaking out. You know, James O'Keefe, these were people that were speaking out on behalf of Trump when there was an alleged election fraud in 2020. And these people have supported this guy, you know, to the hills. But he seems to 100% have changed his narrative. He's 100% turned on the American people. I just don't understand why, unless it's, money. He also, you know, has been mentioning the Epstein files a lot. We'll get to that later. Hi, Ghosted. Thanks for popping in. Sorry, I keep apologising to everybody, but I've had been life in for the last few weeks, so I haven't been able to do anything. World War III's been kicking off, and I've been nowhere to be seen. So let's get here and let's see what's been cracking. But yeah, I don't quite understand why, you know, they're doing what they're doing. But you know, I guess we'll find out in the very, very, very near future. So they wanted this. Let's see what comes of it. Let's see if the US decide to keep backing him. It's very sad to see, as I said, someone like Trump, who was so well regarded and, you know, won an election at a landslide, turn on the American people and start frivolously giving away their money. But there's lots of allegations and lots of allegeds that he's a lot more involved in this Epstein stuff. You know, is this some sort of type of cover up to get people's attention away from that? As you know, on this show, I've been covering a little bit of it and I'm still creating the dossiers of these people. But, you know, his file was massive. You know, some of the allegations against him in these files are massive. You know, there's an audio out there on the internet of him saying, you can't let these files get out there. You know, he's maybe got an invested interest in taking the attention somewhere else. These files have still been redacted. If you have tried to download those files, you'll see that they're not as readily available as what I visually said on the first shows. I knew this would be the case. You know, they just don't want people dissecting this stuff. I think they thought if they just blast loads of files out, people won't go through them. But sloths on the internet like me, we love this kind of shit. So, you know, we've downloaded them and we've got, you know, at our leisure time to go through this stuff. And yeah, his file is the biggest one, believe it or not. Of all the names in these files on my whiteboard, it's just bullet point, questions. You know, this shouldn't be who's running, you know, the Western world. This shouldn't be the supreme leader of the West, should it? If he's in all these files. I just think it's a massive conflict of interest somewhere and we're not giving the right information. So yeah, we'll see what's been going on. But you know, I just hope to God that we can find some sort of type of de-escalation and move to, you know, a more peaceful world. But I just don't think that's going to happen. So I don't know what all your thoughts and opinions are on it. I'd like to hear what a few other people from the panels, you know, think about all of this stuff as well. But yeah, I think we're going to see something quite interesting happen over the next few weeks. So let's see what happens. I'm going to try and keep myself updated. I'm going to try and get myself back in the game and fingers on the pulse for all this stuff. And let's see if we can, get to the bottom of all of this stuff before, you know, potentially we get destroyed over here. I'm worried for Spain. With the Prime Minister saying what he's saying, you know, like, you know, maybe Spain needs some liberation. So maybe this will be the last you see of me. I hope not. But who knows? But anyway, I'm going to try and be a bit more regular. I'm going to try and do something over the weekend, maybe early next week. I'm going to get a bit more informed on what's been happening and stuff and bring myself up to speed. You know, there's deals now that, you know, are apparently being negotiated. Conditions of these deals, as I mentioned before, is just not agreeable on either side. So I can't see how any type of, you know, progression can be made in terms of deals. I don't know if any of you sort of feel differently about that. But I generally think this is some sort of type of stalling market to get us into Easter. I think we're at a stalling stage now where they're trying to calm all the financial markets. And then you'll find, like I said, there'll be some sort of type of escalation. Financial markets will crash. Then there potentially will be some sort of type of de-escalation. Financial markets will recover a little bit, hit their supports and stuff like that on the technical charts. And then we'll see later on in the year some sort of type of like re-escalation in a big way. You know, the ones that, as I mentioned before, haven't got central banks are, you know, North Korea. There's a part for them to play here somewhere. You know, believe it or not, they've been very, very quiet. If you're as old as me, you remember North Korea was the world bad guy but they're going to be really, really quiet. But this is a nuclear capable country as well. So I would like to see North Korea, Iran, Russia, China all come out, condemn what's going on, and tell them to stop. I would love to see that. You know, I'm not saying I want to see a war between these countries. I'm just saying, you know, there's strength in numbers. You know, if the Iranians are being decimated and their country is being destroyed, I would like to see people that have got invested interests in Iran come out and actually protect them. You know, there's lots of natural gas that goes east as opposed to west from Iran, as a lot of you know. You know, the Russians themselves, you know, will be opportunists and try and find a way of making money out of this. But it's in all of these countries' long-term interest to not let the US and the Rothschild banking cartel keep overthrowing governments, you know, and installing central banks and enslaving their countries with debt. I think that's bad. I think that's bad for business. And as I said, once Iran's ticked off the list, there are already a couple left, you know, that haven't got a Rothschild bank. One of them being Cuba, which is completely dark right now. Cuba's got no lights, no electricity. If you go onto Twitter and have a little look, they've been completely destroyed, you know, eternally. You know, it's such a shame because it's such a beautiful country. You know, Havana is, you know, historical, but they just don't comply with, you know, what the US are doing. So they're one of the last countries that are going to be instilled with a central bank. And I think as well that, you know, the other ones, which are Venezuela needs a European central bank now, or a Rothschild bank. Needs a central bank supplied by the Rothschilds. They're in the point of probably getting that into fruition, I would think, now that they've overthrown Maduro there. So there's only a handful of countries, and North Korea also being one of them. So there's only three. That's it. They covered the whole world in terms of like Israeli-owned banks. So I think personally, I think that's what the long-term invested interest is here, and the goal is for these people conducting these operations is, you know, they're working on behalf of, you know, bankers. It's always been the case. You know, let's not make out like I'm saying something outlandish. You know, this, if you've been in conspiracies before, it's always about money. Always follow the money is what the saying was, right? So, Spurs King, you think that you think Russia aren't coming out because they're making money out of the oil prices? 100%. Yeah, 100%. You know, some of the biggest oil companies in the world are in Russia. You know, Russia's a big country. You know, it's also south of Tartaria. So yeah, I 100% agree. You know, right now it's an opportunity moment for them to make money and get new contracts. But don't forget, you know, Russia have also been sanctioned to the eyeball over the last 20 years, as have Iran. You know, they've suffered economically wise because of the way that the West have operated, you know, with their sanctions. You know, the Russia have had their ruble completely destroyed only a couple of years ago. You know, if you was involved with the buy and sell on that like I was, you know, you can make a lot of money, you know, short in the ruble. You know, but the Russians have seemed to figure it out. You know, let's not forget, you know, what 1/8 of, no, not even that, 1/6 of the world's population are in that part of the world. You know, that country is one of the biggest countries. So they seem to have worked itself out, but they must get sick and tired of these Americans and the Israelis, you know, fucking around with the financial systems, you know, unless they're all together and it's a long-term play that they're all in on, it would be annoying, wouldn't it? It would be really annoying that, you know, someone on the other side of the world keeps fucking around with all your finances, you know? So I don't know. I think the Russians probably, like right now, they're probably sitting watching how it all plays out. You know, there is obviously the BRICS agreement. You know, if a lot of you are involved with finance, you know, the BRICS agreement, or the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. All of these countries, you know, they have financial interests away from the West. You know, the West don't want the petrodollar being destroyed, but I think we're seeing it being exposed a little bit here. You know, the US dollar is floating around a lot. It's shooting up and down a lot more than it should do. Yeah, maybe there's some sort of type of financial interest in Russia letting this play out for a little bit. But at some point, as I said, you know, we do want to see, you know, Russia come out and condemn this stuff the same way that Spain have, the same way that a lot of countries have over the last like few weeks. We just can't let it be acceptable. You know, the US people need to tell and vote with their interests. You know, like there's a midterm election coming up in the near future. I would imagine Trump's numbers right now in the midterms are, you know, probably going to be very, very low because he was completely America first, only America. And only a couple of years into his reign and his term, he's doing stuff like this. You know, this isn't in America's interest. You know, if I was an American, this wouldn't be where I would want my US tax dollars going. You know, the only reason why people support this stuff is because they're, you know, being blasted with the propaganda that they see on their, you know, TV stations that are owned by Israelis. You know, like they only follow the information they've been given. They're not open enough to find alternate information. But I definitely think that they're going to need to start waking up, and, you know, they're going to be needing to, you know, put pressure on the political classes that, as I said before, Congress, 90% of them are funded by Israel. So, you know, unless they start changing Congress and they start changing from the top, this is going to continue. So it's a shame. It's a real shame. It's a real shame. I hate seeing the videos. I hate seeing all that stuff. I know a lot of you do as well. You know, I just want world peace, but, you know, maybe I'm a dreamer. Maybe I'm a dreamer. You know, harmony is what God wants. So let's see if we can find a bit more information about this. But anyway, I just wanted to bring you a little video. Sorry I've rattled on for too long there. 45 minutes is well too long for me. So I appreciate all of you popping in. I'll try and get on to Sean and see if we can do a rabbit hole about this stuff in the near future. I know he's got access to all the media stuff on his platform as well, so we can bring a bit more like videos and stuff. But I know he's a busy guy. As I said, maybe he's got an invested interest, maybe not sort of get involved with this stuff as much maybe as I have. I just want truth, and I just want honesty, and I just want facts. That's all I care about. I don't care who's and what. Just want peace and truth. That's the journey. So let's see if we can bring it to an end. But my friends, thank you so much for popping in. I'll try and do, like I said, do another video later on in the week, over the weekend, probably early next week, something like that. I wish you all a blessed Easter with your families. I hope you've all bought some big Easter eggs. One thing I don't do here in Spain is Easter eggs. That really annoys me. I know a lot of people are crying about Cadbury's right now, but I would love to have a Cadbury's cream egg next weekend. You know, luckily my son I got him a big Easter egg and stuff, but you know, you have to go to like a specialist chocolatier, you know, get them to buy it. And they're so expensive, like 50 quid for an Easter egg. It's fucking mental. But I wish you all a good Easter. If you celebrate it religiously, you know, I hope you have a good one with your friends and your families and your loved ones. I hope you celebrate it, you know, how you would like to celebrate it. And I hope none of this war stuff infracts on anyone's peaceful holiday weekend. There's obviously lots of bank holidays over the next week or two. So please enjoy it with your friends and families. And yeah, I'll try not to be so much of a stranger. Again, apologies one last time. You know, sorry, it's been a few weeks since I was able to upload some content. I'm looking forward to getting into Tartaria and one particular subject that I want to get into, but I don't want to blow my channel up too quickly, is the earth is flat. I want to do it. I know a lot of you will hate me, but I'm going to do it. It's coming. So watch out for that one. But anyway, I'll leave you with the outro song for God Wins. And I wish you all a lovely rest of your Thursday. I look forward to seeing you all soon, my friends. Take it easy.
I gave you everything, didn't know where would begin. You pulled away, I fell apart. But God wins. He heals the cracks and lifts me up from deep within. You walked away, I held my heart. But God wins. The flowers fell, all the letters are gone. I found a hope I can lean upon. You broke the spell, time is moving on. Love never fails, I'm never alone. Every promise I made, every tear that I cried, there's a purpose that stays, there's a reason behind. I gave you everything, didn't know where would begin. You pulled away, I fell apart. But God wins. He heals the cracks and lifts me up from deep within. You walked away, I held. But God wins. He wins, he wins. Even in the silence, when the memories play, faith gives me courage to face a new day. From the ashes rising, I can breathe again. Love is stronger, it's not the end.